make you bust before I ever meet you. If it don't hang, then it can't bang. You can't hurt my feelings, but I like pain. If you fuck me and ask who's is it when I ride the dick, I'ma spell my name. Yeah, 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 yeah. You fucking with some wet ass pussy. Bring a bucket and a mop for this wet ass pussy. Give me everything you got for this wet ass pussy. Now from the top, lick it chop. That's a wet ass pussy. Now get a bucket and a mop. That's a wet ass pussy. I'm talking wop, wop, wop. That's a wet ass pussy. Macaroni in a pot. That's a wet ass pussy. Huh.
All right, all right. Thank you for bearing with us through some technical troubleshooting. What's good, folks? My name is Jari Bradley, and I want to welcome you all to tonight's virtual reading with our featured artist, Joy Priest, the 2019 Donald Hall Prize Award winner and author of Horsepower, a phenomenal debut of poetry recently published this year in tandem with Rootwork Journal. And to say a little bit more about Rootwork Journal, okay, Rootwork Journal is a collective of artists, thinkers, dreamers, of Black people who refuse to be undertaken by the captivity of this present world. Rootwork Journal is an up-and-coming literary journal by way of the Bay Area in California. Yes, so we are here tonight. I have the pleasure of guest editing for Rootwork this time around, but also just wanted to have a night where we really engage Joy's work, right? And as a fellow poet, I reached out to Joy as an admirer initially, right? But also as someone who could see their own work being reflected back to them. So this is really an honor for me. This is a really great joy. All right, having spent many years in several institutions earning my MFA in poetry at the University of Pittsburgh and playing out my role here as the postdoc fellow for 2021, the First Wave Fellow, my work has centered the often fraught relationship between the body and nature, in particular, the Black queer body. Reading Joy's work, I began to recognize some of the impulses, motivations, and characterizations of my own speaker, in particular poems that have made their way into her stunning collection, Horsepower. So while developing my own poetic theory, which is also conveniently the title of my own unpublished manuscript, Unruly, Priest's work has illuminated for me the possibility of an unruly speaker and their nature, okay? So, you know, there was so much room for kinship in this long practice of writing while reading Horsepower for me. It set me off into imagining, right, the circumstances and conditions of Black queer survival as centered to that of a Black ecology or Black ecologies, right? So this is what really brings us here, okay? So without further ado, I'm gonna break down the agenda for tonight. For this evening, I will open up with a few poems of my own, and then Joy will graciously read from her wondrous collection, Horsepower. And then we will engage in a pretty informal discussion, right, concerning the linkages and departures of our work to that of a Black ecology, a Black aesthetic, so forth and so on, yeah? And then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So there is a Q&A tab where you will be able to enter questions throughout the night. So feel free to do that as we go on, all right? So a little bit about me. I'm just gonna say a couple points. Got my MFA from the University of Pittsburgh, currently here as a postdoctoral fellow for First Wave, and I'm originally from San Francisco, California. All right, so I feel like those are really just the only things you need to know about me. All right. All right. Hunger, or how I came to be in this world, a small suckling, tiny mouth in weight of fill, birth from a succession of lack, signaling a need my small self could not call then. What has never left my body, This need to be filled, my body a paradox. How empty I remain despite how often I do or do not feed. I want it to end without its ending me. Its shame sprawls my flesh. Its expansion inside me is a state of mind. When I swallow, there is always the promise of crave and its long practice of tricking the body into starvation. At times, thirst is the true culprit, another name for lack. The solution to the body's problem still a matter of consumption. My incessant want runs at each of my ends. I am nothing without its pulsing. Lack is a relentless driver. This is how it spreads. So the work that I'm doing today really is grouped up in this moment of Trans Remembrance Day. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then some of these poems are really geared towards some of that consideration as well. Functified was the unbridled soundtrack of my sex, my boxed out edges baptized in the funk of Blackened Miles, cheap Seagram's gin, flash games of backgammon and Hennessy. I was raised from the passenger seat of my Uncle D's fish-tailed Chevy, rattling Too Short's Pimp Opus from its sparkling electric blue body. Bitch rang from his speakers and spilled out into rain and piss-slicking streets, downtown San Francisco, those very same places I'd flex my adolescence, my one lone pant leg rolled up and capped at the knee, mimicking the brat in the early 90s, her and all her niggas behind her. She was beautiful in the way that men are beautiful. Gender, its fragile schemas, the many ways the world would go on to accuse me of being beautiful, the way a man is beautiful, meant living with the perceived shadow of my deceased father's shame, which is why I must have let her do it. Take a lit match and safety pin, commence to carve each letter, turn scarlet, once etched and burned into my skin, my and my father's shared initials, branded into my right hand, branched by the kinship of wound. Why must I feel like that? Is this the dog in me? Its old faithful need, its same amplified ache to chase that howling thing inside me, crying my body's own hollowed funk. All right, got a couple more here. Wilding. You ask me how I did it, made me a kind of life under such circumstance. I was a child that spent the first 5 years of their life coming to know the body against the nature of failure. My single Black mother barely survived America, and she swore she never meant to do it, to cut into my face, to make me know it, to give me no chance at beauty. Her body a shot through chrysalis of hair and skin, her hunger shaping me. Violence begat violence, its condensed breath, a constant Black buzz in my chest, my hands, not my hands, a menace burgeoning on the tip of morning, its inevitable breaking into me as a sliver of light dawns within my open cavity, its own wild awakening. All right. Uninherited. No, there are no beginnings without a series of endings. I can't tell you the sounds he made once he stopped breathing. Only that the year was 1990, that he was on his way to see his newborn baby girl and died before he could reach me. I can't tell you the sounds my mother made when she learned of my father. Just after his death, she became hysterical with the touch of another man. Some things in life are given to us as is, as in every mention of my father. Never let me forget that I was the spitting image of a dead man, an heir of the deceased. I've never said it until now. How the hands on my mother's man were always calloused, a mosaic of purpled and bruised tissue across the knuckles. I was a child of ghosts dreaming a cerulean sky out of a Black eye, this life given to me as is. Oh, Just what did I see to be except gone? My sliced open face, my blood staining my mother's hands. And then this last poem is in dedication to some of my best friends. Child, makes me somebody's somebody is the call my cherished kin echo against a maze of cell towers just to find me. Is how I know somebody'd come looking if I went missing. Is the only name that matters. What undoes all the need for formalities that render me formless. My grandmother on the phone with her good girlfriends. My grownish behind ear hustling. Her talk of a no good man and an ice pick at his throat at the end of her hand. How much good blood wasn't spilled in the end, praise God, is how far a prayer extends to those of us with loose ends, us descendants of Double Rock, the Pink Palace, the Sunnydale Projects, whose kin descended from the Delta and the Bayou, from where money was spelled Mississippi, and those Bama's clothes stained in chicken grease, all from the same fields. Rows and rows of cotton and nights soaked in homemade gin is what our mothers' chanted in the twilight of bondage, is a misnomer that sets fire to a pale mouth. What baffles a white tongue is our language carried across the delirium of gender. What is Black and inherently queer, and all ours under the firmament. What will be here when we are no more? Some mannish child, some womanish child finding each other on the other end, clucking like they grandmama them, making a sweet gospel of gossip, both each other's somebody. All right. So, without further ado, I want to introduce the phenomenal, the wonderful, the masterful Joy Priest. Joy Priest is the author of Horsepower via the Pitt Poetry Series, published in 2020, winner of the Donald Hall Prize for Poetry. She is the recipient of the 2020 Kunitz Prize, and her work has appeared in the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, APR, the Atlantic Poetry Northwest, and Poets and Writers, among others. Priest has been a journalist, waitress, and fast food worker in Kentucky, and has facilitated writing workshops and arbitration programs with adult and juvenile incarcerated women. She holds an MFA with a certificate in Women and Gender Studies from the University of South Carolina and is currently a doctoral student in literature and creative writing at the University of Houston. Please give it up for Joy Priest.
Okay, so can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? Okay. I have to check because every time I do Zoom, my sound resets. Sometimes I'm like undetectable in sound. So Jari picked the poems that they wanted me to read tonight, which I really appreciate. But I was kind of thinking too, for our conversation, there's a couple of poems from other folks that I wanted to read. So maybe if I could replace two of those. Like if I read 4 from Horsepower and then 2 from elsewhere, is that okay? All right. Is there any one like poem that you just absolutely do want me to read?
Oh no, just you reading, period.
Okay. So American Honey. This is a Phil McFastis. It's after the film of the same name. It's also a sestina. And most folks in here probably know what a sestina is, but in case you don't, it's a form, a received form of sestet, 6-line stanzas. After you write the first stanza, whatever word ends each line follows a changing pattern for 5 more stanzas until it has the envoy, which is like this goes from a 6-line stanza to a 3-line stanza, and the 6 words appear in a particular pattern in the envoy. In case you want to look it up, all those forms are always on poets.org. Okay, American Honey. Oh, the 6 words, in case you want to listen for them, are leaving, own, stars, dread, black, and girl. It's easier than you thought, leaving. Only one night spent sleeping on your own in a motel parking lot beneath the stars of a summer Okolona. Your long-built dread dispersing like gas into a brilliantly black Appalachian sky. For once, you are a girl, unmolested. You could do this, be a girl, without a home, always gone, always leaving behind Strip Mall USA and the dark green dumpster you raid for food, something to own. And the 2 kids no one cares for, the dread that comes on when their father grips you sparkle. Let your freedom build slow like the death of a star across the years. And when she calls for you, granddaughter of Elvis, Confederate flag bikini voice you dread, let the interstates roar, swallow her sound. In your leaving, you see your country for the first time, your very own scene. When he howls for you, your body is a silent black barn hidden in wild grass, and your locks, pastoral black, are ropes for him, swaying from its rafters, dangling star. It's easier than you imagined, leaving behind your own mother, her daughter, her ghost. Now you can be a girl on the back patio with 3 white men, and you can leave with their money, egg suede cowboy hat adorning your dreads. You swallowed the mezcal worm of your fear. Now you're standing in the cowboy's convertible, black wind at the edge of the camera's frame. You're leaving with the getaway boy you found sparking in a Kmart parking lot. You're keeping it alive, your girlhood. The adrenaline, the novelty, the dying star you own a million miles away. You're learning how to own yourself, how to be 14 deep in a 12-seater without dread, how to disarm, how to let it go when the white girl from Florida says nigga again, how to be the only black girl among strangers dancing around a bonfire under the stars, singing out of the sunroof down the interstate, leaving each new town you meet and own a memory in, leaving behind your mother's dread-veined eyes, fuseless stars. Learn it all, girl, until what you've left behind is a brilliant black. That poem starts the first section. The poem that starts the second section is Winning Colors 1988. And basically I just set out to write about in researching sort of like the history of Kentucky and Churchill Downs in particular. I learned that where I grew up in Louisville was right across the street from the horse racing track called Churchill Downs, which is where they run the Kentucky Derby every year, which is the most famous horse race in the world, in case you haven't heard of it. So I found out the year that I was born, a filly, a girl horse, won the Kentucky Derby. And there had only been 3 in the history of the Derby, and now they're not allowed to race in the main race. It's just like these gender things even transfer to you know, the animal world, as we will discuss. Winning Colors 1988. I am born in the season of color blocking and crack, in the dawn of the Reagan era. The light and dark shades of school days dance across movie screens. A girl horse wins the garland of roses. 554 blooms sprout red around her roan neck, shock of black mane, haze of white down her nose. Before her, only 2 fillies clutch the purse. Regret in 1915, genuine risk in 1980 are names for girls. When my birth horse sets off out of the gate, a man and woman are working their 11th hour, twirling around the country club in the graceful choreography of weathered servers. The woman just 12 weeks pregnant, not yet swollen with her dark choice, the man, taking bets and slurs alike out of the mouths of the club's members, rich and red-faced from mint juleps. When the woman hands off the dirty glassware to the man, father of her child, she giggles, smacks him on his great black ass. When the girl comes down the last stretch, she's been out in front the whole race, full of Cairo, violencing the dirt. Expectations stamped into bets, at one point her odds 100-1. When her neck clears the wire into the known world, the dark trumpet sounds. The trumpet was like a common auditory feature of my childhood, because when the race started, the trumpet would sound, the races. What two did I want to drop? All right, Elegy for Kentucky. Actually, maybe, I think this is probably important for the discussion, but I'll do this one. Okay, Elegy for Kentucky. When I wrote this poem, I was trying to like, I guess I was still at a point where I cared about like canonical shit, and I was like, or maybe I didn't so much, but I wanted to get some Greek mythology in the book, and I wanted to like rewrite it, you know? And I was reading the Iliad. I had to read the Iliad. I was reading the Iliad. And the thing that I really took to about it was Achilles' horses. And when, I think it was Patroclus, I forgot his name, but what his friend that took care of his horses, he didn't even take care of his own horses. His friend that took care of his horses got killed in the war, and the horses were distraught. The horses were immortal, but they wept, and so the gods took pity on them in a way that they did not take pity on human beings. And so I don't know, I was thinking about that when I wrote this poem. Elegy for Kentucky. Nowhere to drive night upon night that last summer, but back to the cokey couple I was crashing with in their 26-year habit. On the way there, the same horse always dying at the curb before I turned like a kitschy disco ball onto their street, name I can't recall. There she lay toppled like a toy figurine, calm but huffing, a laboring machine making steam, though the cold air belonged to June, its grief, a filly, done before becoming a mother, great belly, black and wide as all surrender, and that magnificent face still against the grass, waiting on the end. There she was every time whispering something to me, a line throbbing, a visible heartbeat I watched in the mirror for hours with my huge horse eyes. I needed to see her, to make sure she was still there. I went the same way each evening, wanting to feel something, to see this once immortal creature get up. Any weak thing was welcome to finish me then. And when he came into the room with bridle and bit on his 26-year high, when he came up on me where I was lying at that curve in my mind, arms and teeth numb, I did not resist. Just a muted yell inside for months before it lit on me like an ancestor. As a child, I followed my grandfather across the street behind our house, Longfield Avenue, backside of the track where the thoroughbreds for that Maze Derby were trapped, bored of what they were bred for, all their royalty within a corral. My hand, a child's offering, was empty when they snorted and drew their worn noses across my palm, yet it was in their nature to remain friendly toward me. My home did not keep its promise after my grandfather died. There was no protection for what I was without him. Lone black filly, finished before becoming. She must have tired of standing there high-headed, waiting for me to ride her out of that war, to call out, "Let's go, we are done here." And I could read Ghost Ride because it's like that Bay Area connection. Ode to My First Car is the one that I definitely want to drop because there's so many fucking typos in this poem in the book. Like, god damn, like I'm still pissed at them about it. I don't even want to talk about it. Like so many fucking typos in that poem. I don't even know if I'd be able to read it right. So I could read Pegasus. And then we'll see what's up. Pegasus. This is the still the Greek mythology shit I wanted to rewrite. And I was particularly thinking about Medusa. So if you don't know, Pegasus is born out of Medusa's head when, I don't even remember his name because he's unimportant, but one of the male gods like chops off Medusa's head. And Pegasus springs out of Medusa's head, and Medusa was like considered a monster, the Gorgons. And I was just thinking like in whose image, in whose like perspective, and I just wanted to rewrite how Pegasus and Medusa kind of comes on scene together, I guess. Pegasus. Before I leave for good, I lift the pie server a final time, drop the receipt face down next to the lemon blueberry slice, then my apron in the parking lot like a betting ticket. Oh, you know what? I always forget to explain this shit before I read this poem until I get all the way like 6 lines in, like I just did. There's a word in this poem called Gallapalooza. And a Gallapalooza is this art installation in Louisville, where I'm from, where this book is set. It's this art installation where, every year there's a certain amount of these life-size thoroughbred statues that get assigned to a visual artist in the city, and they can decorate them however you want. So there are these like life-size horses just like standing around different parts of the city everywhere. That's what a Gallapalooza is. Pegasus. Before I leave for good, I lift the pie server a final time, drop the receipt face down next to the lemon blueberry slice, then my apron in the parking lot like a betting ticket. There, a horse greets me, but I see it's only a Gallapalooza stationary as all the others scattered across the city. I move on, can't go home, so I disrobe in a stranger's yard, wash the batter away with a garden hose, then ride the night buses like a carousel. Static girl, moving room of mirrors, stilled blue boats streaking the dark there, and then not a stream of atoms being pulled from my cheek. I'm splitting, I'm coming apart, I'm leaving and being left looking for you in all your haunt until I realize I will find you at one of my own in the long field, synced lightning bugs near the show's climax. In the brief flashes of cold light, a glimpse of your coat, black as flight. When they move on, it's just us, 6 legs to the ground, still as statues touching flat the bridge of our noses. When you release your wings, they swing wide as a gate, and the air lifts the snakes from my shoulders. So I wanted to read 2 poems from other folks just to bring them into the conversation that we're gonna have. And one of those poems is Horse in the Dark by Vivi Francis. And this book was like very crucial to me. I read it long before like I had any concept of my book, like years before. And it's one of those things where like after you publish your book, you go back and read this book and you realize like, God, like that was really like osmosis into me, because I didn't even remember, like I completely forgot she had a Pegasus poem in that book. And then, Donika Kelly had a Pegasus poem, and I was like, maybe we all doing Pegasus poems, And I even like got to this point, I'm just being vulnerable. I got to this point, at some point between the book being in the publication process and being published, where I was like, is that too close, to their shit? And like my teacher was like, man, like white people write the same, like a poem about the same thing, have been doing so for like 200 years, so it's fine. And and so I was like, well, maybe it's like a Black aesthetic or something, and why are we all writing these Pegasus poems? And I was like, but also I grew up across the street from the horse racing track, like this is my shit, so. But it was like, that book was just very instructive, along with, Beast Meridian by Vanessa Angelica Villarreal. and Bestiary by Danica, and like, you know, trying to help me work through like why I was, you know, why there was this metaphysical horse that sometimes was a speaker and sometimes wasn't a speaker, and, you know, that sort of thing. So, and we'll talk about that in a second, but this is the title poem from Vivi Francis's second book, Horse in the Dark. Brown as a mule, I stomped through the flocking geese who thought themselves swans. But a mule knows its opposite, and so did I. They were no swans. A horse can be broken by such beauty. A horse may follow it down a slope that will slice its hooves. Beauty, like a restless man in a tall hat, a wandering boy with teeth white as if he had never known meat, or the score of water over stones. I leapt up for the rain cloud shaped like a darker horse, felled a too tall fence believing a horse could be loved more and ridden less, until we fell apart, the horse I was and I. We who had prayed for a heaven of toothless grass and barley, how did we untwine? When did my long face pull itself back into this form? How did words replace nay? 2 legs took my 4, and I freed of my horse self, who lay dead to the world, ran through the clover on 2 legs, ran and ran. And the other poem I wanted to read was from this banger right here. Consider the Deer by Taylor Johnson. Consider the deer who, when I say deer, doesn't know whether or not I mean a single one, though there were 2, dead and shiny with maggots on the side of the highway, or a group of them always a bit lost in the divided woods, blame our need to reach or leave each other faster. Consider the deer that I saw dead on the shoulder midday, mid-autumn, whose neck in post-rigor mortis pining broke itself again so that the head could face the woods setting itself alight. Oh, that I could turn and live again, the deer might say, recalling that one poet singing to himself, ruining the grass. Consider that the deer, when called, won't come alone, purely due to linguistic vagary, who, like me, resist the gesture towards singularity. Call my name and the whole woods rise up inside me. I is a plural state of being. Consider the multitude before my footfall, how I'm able to crane my neck back, see only myself.
Whew, phenomenal. Yes, definitely. Bringing Taylor and Vivi into the conversation is definitely much needed. Thank you for that. So to start off, just, this informal kind of discussion, I wanted to start off with us kind of thinking about the beginning of horsepower. So upon the very start, we have the poem American Honey. The speaker turns our attention to their thought of leaving. Leaving becomes a kind of motif throughout the collection. And I was very curious as to, what necessitates us to begin at the speaker's state of and or desire for departure.
So I was, so first of all, there's a couple of things that was happening in my mind that kind of came together as I was figuring out how to curate and order things. But one of those was like, I really love film. I really wanted to be a screenwriter, but poetry's, more affordable. And I really, so I was like, there's a lot of like, there's the film Ekphrasis series in the book and all that. But then I read this book in grad school called The Witch's Flight by Cara Keeling. And it's called The Cinematic, the Black Film, and the Image of Common Sense. And common sense in this idea that we might get to, which is like, what is common sense and to who? And like Western epistemology is like the larger common sense in which we live and operate. But it's not common sense in certain ways to, you know, Black queer folks. And so in this book, she's talking about, she's theorizing around the Black femme figure. And she says, the Black femme figure is a figure that exists on the edge line between the cinematic or cinematic reality and what Gilles Deleuze refers to in his study of cinema as a radical elsewhere. And so I was just thinking, one, I wanted to curate the collection cinematically. And so I didn't want a linear narrative. I wanted to go in media res. So I wanted to start in the action. And the action also was a glimpse of that figure in the radical elsewhere, which is the leaving, the escape, the flight, the fugitivity.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of, it was kind of like a technical decision of curation for the collection.
Awesome. Yeah. So, you know, in thinking through this notion of a radical elsewhere, it really reminds me of Fred Moten and Saidiya Hartman's kind of joint conversation at Duke University recently about this notion of the Black outside, right? Which I think we'll get into a little bit further. But I think it connects to this follow-up question around the role of nature in horsepower, which I found to be incredibly intriguing. And oftentimes, you know, the way nature is set up in horsepower is often conflated with the concentration on place, right? But I think looking further into how nature takes on a role in this collection, it doesn't seem so much the presence of horses alone or the fact that Kentucky is known for them is it, right? But instead that you know, there are ways that the speaker seems to be concentrating or entertaining this Ovidian question, which I get this Ovidian question from an interview that Bobby Francis actually did with Muzzle Magazine, where you know, it's brought up, you know, how much of man is animal and how much of man is human, right? Nature is so heavy it feels at any moment, ready to erupt and absorb this silly city men have made, which comes from, it's a line from one of your poems, right? So I'm wondering, and I'm very curious about how much of your speaker is reflected in the nature around her, namely the horses that show up throughout the collection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This question requires such like careful. I mean, I really feel like this is what a lot of like critical race theory and like particularly like fugitivity is it's not working hard, but it's like to say the exact right thing in the right way.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so difficult because of that. So like because of the paradigm of common sense we live within, you got to be careful, because if you're operating with Western epistemology and you say that in this context,
yeah,
you're bringing up all of these like you know, canonical renderings of Black people, brown people. And so you know, I think of that like, but so just know, like in my answer, I'm speaking outside of that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of like, I don't know if you've ever read Enrique Dussels, what's the title? Something of the Americas, where he's writing about, I'll look up the title in a second, but he's writing about de las Casas and these like Spanish conquistadors who came over and they're like colonizing, you know, Central America. And they're like, you know, the Enlightenment theory, like sort of, you know how Judith Butler talks about language constructing reality or whatever. It's sort of like they had to rationalize what they were doing.
Right.
That they had to construct this language for the people that they were murdering. Otherwise, like, what the fuck, you know? So a lot of that language was like rendering the human beings that they encountered as less than human.
Right.
So in these explorers' diaries, which Dussel, just quotes at length throughout the book,
Mm-hmm.
you have all of these animal like delineations of the brown people they encounter and the Black people that they enslaved later.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking of I'm thinking of Joseph something. I also have this book. It's in a book. I left all these books in my room. So I was looking at them earlier. Comes up on the Maori Islands and sees two women bathing and says they were skittish as unbroke fillies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Human beings in delineate them as less than human. So when I say what I'm about to say, I'm aware of that.
Right.
Thinking, philosophy, and Western epistemology, and I'm saying I'm speaking outside of that.
Yeah.
And so what I want to say about that is how much of man is animal and how much of man is human. Animal and human seem like a false division to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like something that was created in order to delineate a special class of people as human. That's something different from the average, or different from the people that we are allowed to murder.
Right.
With that being said, I feel like my speaker is more concerned with, or feels closer to the animal or closer to nature than to whiteness. And I think that's important because sometimes I think we have these conversations, particularly as in Black culture, there's these stereotypes about we scared of dogs and we can't swim. All that shit is related to nature. Think about it, and the ways in which whiteness has either I don't know, many different things, our response to being classed as a part of nature, animal, as these certain things, but also that nature being pitted against us in competitive ways, and as industrialization develops in late capitalism. And so I think that I felt the need to, maybe I always feel the need to lean into a love for nature more than a love for, our common sense, capitalism.
Right.
And I also think about what Vanessa Angelica Villarreal does in Beast Meridian, where you kind of embrace the beast.
Mm-hmm.
Beast. I don't fuck with whiteness, which thinks it's better than the beast.
Right. Yeah, and I think those are really important points to raise, right? Because some of what Vivi talks about too is the pathology and the pathologizing that Black folks have sustained vis-a-vis the animal image, right? But that there is also a much deeper connection or possibility that nature provides a Black subjectivity, right? Which I think is really striking. In terms of this larger conversation, right, that we're having about humanity and animalia, and the faux separation therein, right? But that Vivi brings up, having once come from a people who were once considered chattel, right? And this kind of there being more of a connection there to actual chattel, right? Than say what you're saying, for instance, about whiteness, right? So I think it's important to raise some of those concerns that I think Vivi talks about. Yeah.
But that's painful, too. So it's I think about my 5th grade grandfather, who I was archiving for the African cemetery. And so in my downtime, I would like use these, you know, you learn like archival protocols and like, you know, you practice them or whatever. And so I would like work on my family. In the meantime, I learned like my 5th grade grandfather was bred literally like an animal and had 248 like, which I hesitate to call children because I don't even know like if he, you know, so it's like, I said, I think I brought that up one time in a conversation at a bar. Don't ask me why. Like, said the most foulest shit about it. And so, you know, I think like there's this impulse to, you know, I see in the comments too, we are of the earth and nature and animalia, but we are full in our humanity. So I think coming out of a reality where you're not considered a human being, which is this, again, this constructed class of people who have seemingly full rights and everything, to do whatever they want. The impulse is to strive to achieve humanity. Then,
right?
You want to be recognized as human,
right?
And so I don't know. I'm interested. You know, I'm saying like, what did that lead to? That led to like certain kinds of assimilation in order to be a human being. We could only be as human beings if, you know, we decided I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman, and you know, and I'm thinking of like early 20th century, like they're like assimilating into the nuclear family, heterosexual family.
Right.
I can be a wife and a mother, I can be a human being, you know, and those sort of things. So it's kind of so Erica just asked the question I'm kind of like, you know, getting at, I guess. You know? Which is like, you know, I only want to talk about this stuff with my closest homies, like space, you know. But you know, I just think the question is important, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this next question, you know, in terms of a connection to fugitivity, right, and some of what Fred Moden and Sadia Hartman talk about, I'm really struck too around how the whole collection really reminds me that, you know, whole ecosystems were built through our long blood. So this is a line taken from your poem, My Father Teaches Me About the Bees, right? On the topic of a Black ecology, if we were to have conversation about that, how would you say Horsepower demonstrates or envisions a reality of Black embodiment, environment, and survival? And I'm really like pulling from to Christina Sharp's In the Wake, where she talks about the weather and anti-Blackness as this kind of all-consumptive thing that also kind of is like the weather, akin to being the weather, which is like it's ever present, right? And what I really loved about Moten's notion of fugitivity and the outside is like, you know, this question again around, you know, how do we begin to think, you know, or imagine rather, right? How do we utilize our imaginations to imagine these other ulterior kind of spaces, these other possibilities?
Sorry, I was responding to Erica's question. Please. Sorry. Can you just say it again?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Fred Moten introduced this really interesting concept around, you know, particularly in this context of Black writing and nature, a need to be imagining the outside, right? There's this whole thing that they talked about around the inside, the outside, and how the outside offered an ulterior, a kind of Black ulteriority, which Harriet Mullen talks about in terms of a different non-conformist practice or expression of Blackness, right? And so I'm pairing those two kind of concepts or ideas, right? That there can be an outside of Black alterity that exists, and how that manifests or happens vis-a-vis like being embedded within this ecosystem of anti-Blackness, right, that Christina Sharp kind of talks about, right, which recalls for me this notion of whole ecosystems that are built through our long blood, right? Does that help clarify a little bit?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that talk too. And I thought in the beginning, like they were kind of gonna get into like this Black ecological discussion in a way that I'm thinking of. C. Riley Snorton has been doing recently,
Yeah.
but they kind of, I guess they are talking about that, but they're really talking about being within a common sense system, being within it, living in it, but also, damn, let me run and get my notebook.
No problem. No problem. Yeah, if y'all haven't checked out, there's a talk that's up on YouTube right now between Fred Moten and Sadia Hartman via Duke University in relationship to Black fugitivity, this project that they're working on entitled The Black Outside. So if you have a chance, y'all should check that out, just for context.
Yeah, so Sadia says, so she's talking about the Black critical tradition, and she quotes Douglas saying, like, one is only able to give an account of it from the outside. Mm-hmm. And so she says, part of what that critical tradition is trying to do is trying to produce a thought from the outside while in the inside. The enclosure is so brutal. Mm-hmm. Enclosure is like a really important word to me. I think about like being corralled, into stables, being corralled into reservations, being,
right. Carceral systems, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Carceral systems, what the enclosure of common sense, a history of Black thought that's actually not the thought of canonical thinkers, but this labor of trying to produce an outside, trying to create an opening, which is often only discernible belatedly. And it's discernible as it becomes either marked as crime or subject to a new form of enclosure. Right. If we produce a thought that's outside of common sense, it won't be understood as something important until later on. And it will often be marked as criminal. Right. So I don't know. I don't know if that kind of like gets away from your question, but when you brought up the Black outdoors, I'm thinking of that. And then I'm thinking of like, well, of course we know like one of the ways to produce an outside was like, maroons, running away, leaving, escaping, right. Living in the trunks of trees, as called out. But I think in the line, like whole ecosystems are built through our long blood. Man, you ever write something and that line was so important to you and you had on your head, and now I just don't even, it still makes sense to me, but I don't remember why I was so excited about it.
For sure.
But I think that I was thinking about when enslaved Africans were brought over, there were all of these, they were seen as a market in the sense that like the entire economy of this empire was built off of them as a market, built off of our ancestors as a market. And like Chase Bank exists today because of that. Right. Because like insurance policies taken out on this market. At the same time, other things were also being brought over, like honeybees.
Right.
And so I was just thinking about how, we were all part of creating this, like what the ecosystem in its present state. It wouldn't have been the same otherwise. Right. Yeah.
For sure. So, with that consideration, right, what's really clear is how nature acts as a parallel and as witness. So, the horses throughout the collection are situated as witness and as physical parallels for the speaker's own body, right? I get into this kind of pairing when I think about, what each the speaker and horse or horses have witnessed and endured throughout the collection. I think there's like quippings around that, and this shared need for escape, right? Which is really interesting as well. So when we're talking about like an ecosystem, um, I think of those things as well, and like how certain there's a way that we are living the afterlives of slavery, right? So like how some of those things are still very present, right, in our current ecosystems. Things never really die, right? Things never really. We're still living with and in the presence of an afterlife of slavery. Um, so much of these poems in Horsepower are derived from memory, right? And I'm thinking about.
Wait, I wanted to ask a parallel question though.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I was thinking, you presented it to me yesterday, but
Mhm.
I was thinking like that again, it goes back to like respect. Like there's more respect for the horse in the book than there is for, whiteness or like people assuming their identity in the book. That
Right.
the whole idea of horsepower is like this mental fortitude or
Mhm.
vigilance. Um, and so it's like the speaker looks to the horses for that strategy of escape, but also in terms of like just craft poetry, like poetic craft. Um, when you're working, when you're writing like place driven poetry,
Mhm.
a technique that I like to do is like you take something that the speaker is feeling or the emotion that you're writing about and you project it onto the landscape in some way. So,
Mhm.
um, you know, the trees are this is basic. It's not a line of mine, but like the trees are weeping. You know,
Mhm.
um, what do you have here? Mm, but yeah, just like projecting like the speaker wanting to escape, the speaker knowing something is wrong, but using the figure of the horse to like make that evident,
Right.
especially because the speaker in certain poems is a child, so there's not like you don't want to write like you don't want to write a child speaker with your present like consciousness. So I was like using the like certain features of the landscape to as like to imbuing certain features of the landscape with those emotions and those like thoughts.
Mm. Word. Okay. Is it cool if we get into the reserve questions, or
What?
how you feeling? Is it cool if we get into the reserve questions?
I didn't finish rereading Evie Shockley's intro, so I'm
Okay.
gonna be like,
Well, maybe not that one, but the one before it. How about that?
what was that one? The memory one?
Uh, the collection of poems, Ghost Ride, Ghost or God of the Motorcade. That question.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, cool. So in poems like Ghost Ride, God of the Motorcade, In the City, Junker, Horsepower takes on another image, one of muscle cars and risk. Yeah. So I'm reminded in these poems of Saidiya Hartman's notion of the wayward, right? The speaker in these poems exercises a kind of wayward version of girlhood and womanhood that the speaker is encouraged to perform while also navigating sensations of the body, lust, and thrill. How do these poems lend themselves to the nature of seduction, dangerous sexuality, and animal instinct?
I forgot that I wanted to turn some of these questions back onto you because
I welcome that.
I'm talking about these things, but I was just, thinking about your line, joy is a wild thing.
Mm-hmm.
Before I answer that question, I was just wondering, like, how do you, like, what was behind that line, or like, how do you feel about that in the context of our discussion about this division between what's man and what's animal, what's human and what's animal?
Yeah. So that line comes from a poem called, sometimes I forget the titles of my own poems. That poem is called, oh my God.
Interior.
Thank you. And really, for interior, I was trying to think through how to write about joy, but joy from a fraught body, or a body of intersection that often finds complexity or difficulty around joy, but that there is within this inexplicable space, this kind of outside that's inside for me. When I think about where joy and the nature of it could come from a speaker who has been subjected to harm and violence, and also certain discriminations, that, like, as a Black genderqueer speaker, those are like at the forefront of my speakers kind of piecing together any kind of rationale or any kind of understanding of their condition. So, joy is a wild thing really came because, like, in the midst, or I think in the presence of Black queer considerations of being, there are ways in which our joy is complicated. And in some ways, there are ways in which our joy is criminalized or made to be carceral. And so joy is not, to me, this one-off kind of thing of simply experiencing pleasure, but that joy comes through a set of complicated emotions and comes from pain too. And so in that poem, I'm trying to navigate, like, the wilderness of shame, but also of pleasure. How to rest, a kind of radical consideration of what joy could be for a speaker that has these intersections, who has also been deemed non-human, or a kind of non-human subject, if that makes any kind of sense. So, somewhere in all of that came a poem, right? And came the line, joy is a wild thing.
Yeah. I like how it goes, though. I just said that phrase, but it's a part of a line that's joy is a wild thing, interior, in the wilderness of my body when loosed. So play back and forth between the inside and the outside. In conversation with what Sadia was talking about in that talk, that the wilderness happens inside of us, and our interiors, as Black people, as queer people, is the outside. Outside space.
Yeah. And it was really deep to me to consider Moten suggesting that, gosh, where's it in my notes? I'm not gonna feel ashamed to read from paper. In the midst of them having that conversation, Fred Moten talked about, a thought from the outside can only be achieved from the inside. And I really considered, like, when we talk about, and this also clues me into the speaker of horsepower, which is, kind of how I recognize my own speaker. There's a kind of resilience in these speakers. And one that, for all of their conditions, right, the pathological kind of understanding of speakers that come from these kind of conditions is that they don't make it, that they don't survive. But what Moten suggests is that it is through the imagination, and particularly from the interior, that you get the ability or the possibility of an outside. And I just really felt like that honed in on what we mean when we say resilience and in consideration of Black futurity, but also Black queerness, how these intersections and these bodies make it possible to imagine, right, this ulterior space that ultimately leads us to survive, and thus also leads to an escape, right, or a kind of exodus, if you will. And horsepower for me really, really phoned that in, that it was the speaker's ability to, from the inside, create this possibility of an outside. So this consistent desire of leaving, the kind of escape, that constant presence of that thought really just kind of phoned in that sentiment of Moten's for me. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, there's a question in the Q&A. I don't know if the person is still here, but they asked, have you read Sylvia Wynter's work? If so, how are you thinking about her notion of? So I have not. Most of these things that I'm talking about and the text that I'm talking about, I read in my master's when I was like writing my women and gender studies thesis for around the book, like trying to articulate this lineage in the context of like Black feminist lineages and histories. And I didn't read Sylvia Wynter, but Vanessa actually just sent me this entire book on the subject, and so I'm working through it right now. So I don't really have an answer to the question. And so really, just all of these things, like I don't have a PhD, I'm getting one, I'm in the first semester of it. All this, I'm just kind of like wondering and thinking through, and like I'm probably at some stage that has already been figured out by the scholars I haven't read yet, you know? So just sort of just going through like things I was thinking when I was trying to figure out why in the hell I would make a Black girl speaker a horse, you know? So, you know, of course, thinking of Zora's famous line, the Black woman is the mule of the world, and all that stuff. And I was thinking of, you know, the tradition of labor, but I haven't read Sylvia Wynter, so I wouldn't know about her notion of human. But if y'all would like to like discuss it in the chat.
Definitely. We definitely welcome that. You know, we're not experts necessarily, you know what I'm saying, in any one given, you know, topic, you know what I'm saying? And I think that's always, this reading for me really was about, you know, really trying to explore, you know, what I mean when I say the unruly, but also really exploring like, you know, a poet's process, right? When they're creating, and especially like a collection, like a first book, like, you know, how that process looks, especially considering like these questions around animalia and man and humanity, and but also like gender and girlhood, Black girlhood at that, right?
And Jari's word was unruly, mine was wayward, you know, and I, you know, wayward, like, you know, she's wayward.
Right.
But also like, you know, wayward, like unruly, like, and
yeah,
which is to say like, fuck your notion of humanity and what a human being is. Like, not saying like Black people aren't human beings, but fuck, like, question notion of what a human being is.
Right. Because that traditionally did not include us, right? So regardless, we do not conform to this standard notion of what humanity is anyway. Therefore, you know, we are automatically fugitive, right? Which is kind of like Moten's thing.
Which isn't, it's not just like, and I say this in my essay that I sent you, it's not really any one Black scholar's theory. It was legally constructed in the fucking Constitution of the United States that a Black person is fugitive without a matter.
Right.
Gabe asked a question in the chat. Should we answer that?
Yeah, we can do that.
I'm just taking over your.
Go do your thing. This is a shared joint reading. I own nothing.
Gabriel asked, how old is the oldest poem and how new is the newest poem, and when do you know the manuscript was done? The oldest poem is like from 2009, maybe. I was like 20. I'm about to be 32, so maybe like 12 years old. And the newest poem I probably finished when I sent it off to Poetry Northwest this summer after the book was already like pretty far along in the process. And that's owed to my first car. And I knew the manuscript was done when I had the title. I mean, the manuscript, I don't really feel like it's done at all. Like I'm really like, I'm Capricorn, Virgo, type A. So like I see things wrong with it all the time. But I knew it was ready to be sent out when I had the title, which is after I wrote the title poem. I was like, oh, that's the fucking title of the book. And that was fall 2018, the penultimate semester of my MFA. Now, mind you, I've been working on this manuscript for 10 years. So I went into the MFA with a pretty developed manuscript, but penultimate semester. And that's when I sent it out to contest, when I was like, okay, I got a title. I'm ready, let's go. Right. And every time I sent it to a contest, it was a revised draft.
Okay. Yeah.
I won on like the second draft. Like I have been working on the manuscript. I finished it. I ordered it. I curated it. Boom. Sent it into one contest. The second one I sent it into was the one I won. And so when I went to submit my manuscript to the director of the press a year later, it was different. It was not super different, but there was maybe like 3 poems in different places. I went through line revisions and stuff like that. So it's just, it was like, it's a constant process while it's going through production. And by the end, you just like, let me one more thing. And then boom.
Word. Cool. So, I mean, we can move in definitely to questions from the audience right now. Let's see. I see one question. Can y'all discuss the perhaps regional implications and differences between wayward and unruly? Your Southern waywardness, your urban or inner city unruliness. I guess I'm asking y'all's personal history, hearing or coming across that language. I appreciate you for that question, Jabari, AKA best friend. Yeah, I think that's interesting. These kind of regional differences. What do you think, Joy?
I don't know. I just always think about Justin Philip Reed's answer about indecent, like what it means to be indecent. And I don't know, I just love how the longer you think about those like Southern Black colloquialisms, which I guess like maybe, I mean, I don't need to be defensive about it, but I know someone's gonna be like, white people say it too, but whatever. Like Southern, the more that they seem relevant to this discussion, like about the unruly, and it's like, what does it mean to be indecent? What does it mean to be wayward? What does it mean to be unruly? And like, as we were trying to, I don't know, like I'm not my ancestors, so I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody, but I think it's a real impulse to assimilate, if you think about it, or like ornery, or which is Henri, or what else? Yeah, so it's like, I don't know. The implications of regionality though, I'm trying to think if I heard unruly. It wasn't really, I definitely heard wayward.
Yeah. Unruly is like, it's so interesting. Unruly is a word that I hadn't really grown up with or heard before, but it felt very precise to me. And there's also a way in which, like in Jamaica, unruly means a very distinct thing. It's really a kind of celebratory resistance. So most folks are like, yes, unruly, be unruly. It's a state of nonconformity. And I just love that concept. I loved how applicable that felt to, I think, a Black queer embodied existence, and how much that word encapsulated for that kind of state of being. And I think in terms of like a regional difference, like I'm not from the South, you know what I mean? Like I am straight up Bay Area born and bred, right? So, and I think that has its own, you know, it has its own mythos that is really hard to peg down. But for the most part, I think, you know, being from that city is unruly because in a way, San Francisco, the Bay Area is kind of an unruly place where there are many different things, many different elements, and many different people. You know, you have different music, all this stuff that is like happening all simultaneously at one time. And I think it creates a different kind of disposition, you know, for a Black genderqueer person in relationship to, I think, other parts of the country, and in how that kind of unruliness or waywardness could be discussed. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but I'm just thinking out loud and riffing on that question.
I didn't really explain what wayward meant when I heard it growing up, but I would say like yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like the, you know, meaning of like diasporically, like Jamaica was always turned about being like resistant. Like the shit that went down here couldn't go down in the Caribbean. It just wasn't, and this just wasn't as many white people there either. But
Right.
You know, like coming out of that tradition, like how that's embraced. But wayward, I guess I heard it from like older women, older Black women, talking about somebody that was like fast, about a woman that was fast, or just like not ladylike.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like she went.
Definitely. I mean, I think, yeah, my grandmother didn't call it wayward. It was something else, which I would rather not repeat. I think like for her, like unconventional.
Because they had a whole system of like, it wasn't them I would hear it from, maybe like older church ladies, but like my grandmother and my great aunt, actually, they was some fools like with my grandmother. But they had a whole like system of whole status that you went through. Like it would be it was like Trixie in training. And then I forgot the middle one, but they were like old hoes. It was like Trixie and old hoes. Like
okay. Wow. Word.
Definitely wayward.
Yeah.
Hierarchy of Hodom. Yes, exactly. You know what I'm saying? You felt, you know, Trixie, you thought you had to work your way up. Like, yeah. I gotta get on it. But yeah, I'm trying to think. And so I think in thinking about wayward in the book, I was also, and I put this in the essay too, I was thinking of like fugitivity. Like I theorized, like I looked at Moten and Hartman Card killing Tina Camp, Catherine McKittrick writing about fugitivity and thinking like, fugitivity seems to be, you know, it's a theory. It's also this like socially constructed thing in the legal codes of the United States. But mainly what Black scholars seem to be talking about is this like resistance. It's like living within the institution and within the structure, but like being resistant to it, or existing, the very existence being like perpendicular to that. And so the institution I like was thinking about when writing the book was the institution of the heterosexual nuclear family. And as a Southern Black girl, like what's expected of you. And certainly leaving home is not acceptable because you got to take care of everyone. You think about yourself. Right. And so I was just trying to write about like wayward as an aspirational thing for us. Like not to feel like, oh, like running away is a bad thing if it means saving your life.
Right.
That's what I was thinking about with wayward. And also like wayward as in like fuck those like prescriptions of like what it means to be ladylike.
Mm-hmm.
The other kind of gender prescriptions.
Yeah, a lot of that I like gleaned from Sadia Hartman's work. Wayward. The full title escapes me. What's the full title?
Life's Beautiful Experiments.
Yes, right. So she's doing that kind of
Duh.
that theorizing. Yeah. So she's doing all of that work in that text, which is where my encounters with Wayward came in. And so I think, yeah, like all of what a wayward existence communicates, and especially around this notion of womanhood and girlhood in Black families, particularly Black Southern women, girls, that sort of thing. Like, I think all of those considerations are really important to raise because I think they offer a different perspective in how we get free, how we create or imagine an outside from within. I think a person with a memory of a Black girlhood is someone who is often silenced, is marginalized, and we do not see them in the forefront of their own narratives, which again, I think Horsepower really exemplifies and demonstrates, why that is so significant. Because, Horsepower to me does this work that you said before. It works on like on this macro level of like a conversation around like two separate Americas, right? And what it is to come from that, how insidious that becomes in regards to the family, but also this micro level kind of conflict around belonging and not belonging, and also being othered because of it, right? So all of those considerations in relationship to a wayward speaker, I think like the way, we get to the end of the book and there's Pegasus and that's like that's the escape, right? Like all of that was just very intriguing and compelling to me, really, without being too long-winded. Do we have any other questions in the chat?
Oh, that's interesting. Can you speak to some concepts of the beast, animal, subhuman as holy and sanctified? I think that's the project, is to write those.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think of Bestiary by Donica Kelly, and I think of Meridian by Vanessa Angelica Villarreal. And like particularly Vanessa's book, she creates this new cosmology to honor like this is my reading, the matriarchal line of her family and her ancestors. But we live in an enclosure that is so brutal, like an epistemological enclosure, where just by definition, the beast animal is not considered holy and sanctified, in which we are savage, and so I think we writing those. That's the project. But I don't know. Can you think of any off the top of your head like that? You mean like that's already sort of been written?
I think in different. I think in a European westernized colonial kind of sense, no, I cannot. I think in like certain older Yoruba traditions and other kinds of traditions, there are those images or those mythos of animals or trickster figures or certain figures.
Right.
We have like Aesop's fables. You have like Brer Rabbit, and then the kind of folk tale lessons that those animals would provide. Anansi the spider. This kind of the lessons that would come from these kind of animalistic figures for African diasporic folks, like that, those are central to how we make sense of the world. And so those kinds of considerations of animalia really also explode kind of like, I think what we're talking about, right? as far as possibilities or avenues or avenues for a possible outside that is not inherently negative or violent or damaging, but rather like there is a kind of moral code or there is a kind of thing to glean from that informs us about humanity. So a lot of the creation stories and so forth, if you can think back to those traditions, those are kind of the things that I think about in terms of where that question is kind of gearing me to think about, and I think too about one's own personal impulse to write in the vein of, animalia, which I think for me, nature provides a different kind of awareness or understanding. It's almost like a sixth sense.
Where it's
that,
just, it's just a space from which to pull knowledge that has been
right,
obscured as not knowledge. Like
right,
the idea that we think about animals as dumb when really we're ignorant of them. Like we're say, oh, it's like my dog. I'm just like, she's just a dog. She doesn't get it. Her memory is like this long. How the
right.
fuck do we know that? We're not in the dog's mind. We don't know
Right.
what the dog knows. The dog might have some like longer, less parochial understanding of the world than us and be like,
Yeah. Right.
What's the call when you come back? Come on, help me out.
Man.
You re-manifest as something else.
Okay. Yeah.
The whale, the octopus, all this shit that's smarter than us, and we think we like, the superior shit, and so we say there's no knowledge to draw from an animal.
Mm-hmm.
Who told you that? Dogs are merely tolerating us. Oh my gosh, Patricia's here. I'm talking shit. Lord have mercy. Is that Patricia?
Which Patricia is this up here?
Anyway, so I just remembered Kingdom.
That's the one and only Patricia. My bad.
Oh my god. I just remember Kingdom Animalia by R.S. Lee Skermai. Like, I just want to talk about R.S. Lee like whenever I can. So like that. And I remember when I was asking her, I taught her poem Elegy for my intro to poetry class over the summer. And my students were fascinated by the parrots in the poem. So I tweeted like, what do y'all think the parrots are about? And she answered, and she had this like amazing like answer about it that I screenshotted. And maybe if you talk, I can find it on my desktop.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I think too, while you were talking about that, I was thinking about like, and this could be wrong, this could be totally wrong, but in my mind, I think about how, I think to some degree animals understand carnal pleasure. Like there are some, like, I think hunger is universal. There's a universality to me to hunger in that regard. Like, just certain like primal kind of base urges, instincts, things like that, I think, which might be pathological, you know what I mean? Could be crazy, but like, to me, I think those are shared kind of impulses to some degree.
But see, that's another thing. As a poet, I think we're less concerned about like intellectual knowledge and more, not less concerned, like it's a binary, but like, we also know the importance of like knowledge that comes from feeling.
Right.
Which is like also not, but it's like not a popular kind of knowledge.
And it's not often explored either.
Epistemology.
Yeah. Like feeling in the academy is not considered a thing. It's not considered a real knowledge system. Like if people, at least in my own experience, I think the initiative or the push was to move away from feeling. And I think in a way, like,
what I'm always talking about.
Yeah. Like that's, and it still happens. So that tradition is still very relevant and it's still very stifling. So, I think about nature and animalia as that kind of space for an alterity, a potential Black alterity to exist. Yeah.
I remember one time, like, I think it's like Terrence Hayes' reading at, what's that one DC bookstore that everybody got poetry?
Busboys and Poets.
No, not that one.
Gagged. Gagged. Thought I knew.
Politics and Prose, I think.
Okay.
And somebody, how people like come up with a like really intellectual question.
Yes.
And really, it might have been like he was like, I don't got shit to say about that. But like I thought his answer was so fucking good. Like I just like, it's just one of those things. Like I watched like hella readings on YouTube, but I remember like almost every day. Like he was like, I'm not trying to get it thought, I'm trying to get it feeling. That's like there's a knowledge in that.
I like that landing there. I think that's the sentiment really with all of this.
Willie is here, and Willie asked, "Hi y'all, hi Willie."
What's up?
Is there ever an impulse to arrange or Willie, how is your aloe plant doing? Let us know in the chat. Is there ever an impulse to arrange or make order of your understandings of waywardness or unruliness? Sometimes I can't both read and absorb the meaning of what I'm reading. Does that ever happen to you when you got to read out loud in class?
It is.
When everybody's talking and be like, what the fuck did I read?
Yes. It's all right. It's all right.
Supposed to arrange or make order of your understandings of waywardness or unruliness in your poem's art making as a further act of resistance. Thinking of arrangement in regards to positioning and weaponization, a la the gospel standard, order my steps. Willie, don't come in here trying to write a whole motherfucking paper in this Q&A.
That's a Virgo for you. That's what we do.
The poem happening. A la the gospel standard, order my steps. Is order arrangement inherently in opposition to waywardness, unruliness?
I'll start off with that question, and I'm purely going off of the way that I'm receiving it. So Willie, this may not at all be how you were intended, and that's cool too. But I'm thinking about, and specifically, I think this is also contingent upon where you are in your manuscript. Like, I think we're, as an unpublished author, I think it's a different relationship in terms of arrangement. I'm still very early in that stage. Like for me, I'm still getting my feet wet in that realm. And so I think when I think of order my steps, I think of my steps being ordered, which for me constitutes this notion of faith, having faith that things are falling into place as they should, a la a higher power that has already ordered my steps. So when I think of arrangement in that regard, I'm thinking about how one might use their intuition, right? How intuition shows up in the work of arrangement for a manuscript, and also like how many times you have to rearrange the manuscript, right? That first arrangement may not be, the end arrangement, but practicing a certain kind of faith is what this potential question is calling up, right? And I'm not quite sure. I think there's intuition that is involved, but also I think there's a kind of implementation of strategy or strategies too, in tandem with faith, potentially, that folks would need to adhere to in terms of an arrangement of a manuscript, if you will.
Well, this makes me think of two things. Some gospel songs are simulationist tales, and some gospel songs are, I'm thinking more like, I was thinking a lot about when I think Tina Camp, maybe it's not Tina Camp, but one of the scholars brought up like Negro spirituals as like a remedy to institutions, to the institution of slavery. In the way that the North Star was a remedy to that institution. And so I think about like, there's a leak in this whole building, y'all, and my soul has got to move. My soul, that inside outside, you know what I mean?
Period. Period.
Moving out of the body that keeps me, yes, Jada. Inside of this institution, you know?
Yes.
But it also makes me think of Fred Moten. Oh my God, I went to this talk recently. I can't sing that well no more, Jada, because I smoked a lot of cigarettes. And I quit like 3 months ago though. I was a tenor, alto, second alto, you know. But I went to this talk last week where Fred Moten, they put Fred Moten on a panel with, it was Fred Moten, Ross Gay was Ross Gay did this shit. And it was great. Like it was Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, and then 2 queer Black scholars who I wrote their names down, but I can't remember them because that was my first time encountering them. But y'all probably know who they are. And then these white anarchists. And I was like, if y'all don't quit putting Fred Moten on these panels with these white anarchists, is violent. He's like, his whole like argument is, yes, contralto, yes, that's me. His whole argument is kind of like, it's like, it renders what they trying to do, it's just not in the same, it's, you know, they're antithetical. So anyways, he's talking about, you know, fugitivity and all this stuff, and they talking about, and they just keep like cutting him off, and like literally, have you ever been to like a panel and it's like it's for a Black scholar, and like you just don't, in your Black mind, you just know nobody, a white person would not be, they're not gonna get up and talk first. They're not, oh. And like every time they're the first person to the mic. That happened in this panel. And, so he was just basically saying, like, I'm just thinking about Willie's question about like arrangement or making order of the wayward, which is probably, I guess I did by like ordering to some rationale in my mind, like the poems into a book, you know. But Fred Moten is very committed to this, like, you know, is very resistant to like ordering that thinking into West, I forgot the phrase he used for it, but like Western systems, binary systems of like, you know, that, you know, Marxist anarchists are kind of like, they think they're being radical, but they're not, because they still white people talking first. Anyways,
right.
He's still like, he is, if anything, I think what's so effective about him is he just like perpetually resists making common sense on purpose, not common sense to you know, the wayward or the fugitive, but common sense, you know, in the ways we've learned to think in Western education.
Yeah,
it's hard to
definitely.
You just gotta catch yourself when you can.
Right. Right. Okay, cool.
So like what? Any more questions? Did you eat dinner yet?
No. So you know what's gonna happen once this thing is over. All right. Any other questions? Joy, do you see any other questions over here?
No. But let's see what's in the chat.
Yes.
Yes. There's only certain songs I can sing to. Like that was one of the songs I sang in church. But you know, the way my voice works, like I could sing Lauryn Hill, Toni Braxton growing up, but I couldn't like sing Mariah Carey.
Ooh, who could hit them notes?
There's just like a certain range. Like I can do really low, and sometimes I can do really high, but I can't do in between.
Word. Don't nobody ask me to sing on here. Thank you. All right. Um, word. I mean, I think all in all, like I just have felt very indebted to this moment, this conversation, this culmination of talking through some of these concepts, these ideas, but also talking through your work, Joy. It's made such an incredible impact on me and continues to do so. So I'm very grateful for your vulnerability, but for your willingness and for your generosity, right? I think this is very generous to share your process, your wisdom, your mastery with us, and have continuously done so for quite a while. I really wanted to say before we wrap things up with the 10 minutes that we have, that I appreciate you very, very much in your work and its impact on us all. So.
When's that unruly coming?
It's coming. I think that the easiest answer is that it is coming and I'm working on it. And give it about a year or two, you might see something about it. I think that's it. That's the most that I am at liberty to say before anything is signed. So
liberty means somebody's interested in it.
Yeah. That's exactly what that means. There's very specific interest that is happening. But until things are signed, we can't really go into great detail, I guess. So
thank you so much, Jari, for inviting me to do this. And we always talk about the conversation continues with us. I love all of our mutual friends that came, and just appreciate y'all sitting here listening to us. I wish we was in a room and y'all could,
right.
But yeah, what else?
Look a lot different.
At home for Thanksgiving, I'm making some sides. I don't know. I don't never do the meat, so I guess I'm having a vegetarian Thanksgiving because I don't do the turkey. I'm about to do. What y'all making for Thanksgiving? Best place. Oh yeah. Books that we read from tonight. This one and this one. If you don't have this one, I was also thinking in Taylor's poem, "Call my name and the whole woods rise up inside me."
Yeah. That's one of my favorite poems by Taylor is Consider the Deer. For those lines in particular.
I laid down among the tall grass and came up like a specter. I came up doing what
support the kinfolk. Support that. Yes. All these wonderful, amazing books by Black people.
Black ecologies.
Amen.
All
right, y'all. Well, without further ado, we're gonna head on up out of here. But thank you so much again for coming through. And just to let folks know, writers in the room, Rootwork Journal is currently open for submissions. I am the guest poetry editor for this next issue. So be on the lookout, my social media and so forth. I'll be plugging the submissions. Also, you can go to rootworkjournal.org, I believe, I want to say. Yep, rootworkjournal.org. You can go there and check out the open call for submissions as well. So thank you all for a great night. There were so many legends in the room. We were so honored and blessed by y'all's presence. And yes, onward with the unruly and horsepower and waywardness. All right. Peace, y'all.